Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name's Kendall Miller. I'm COO at ReactiveOps. You can see it in my shirt. I've been at the company for a little over 3 years. About 3.5 years ago, I was making a big transition into the tech industry, and so a lot of this is going to be about that experience. And then now, as a hiring manager, since February, I've hired 25 people, 10 full-time employees, and 15 full-time contractors. Those numbers are low. 30 something? I don't know. It's in there. So I do a lot of hiring, and because I do a lot of hiring, I do a lot more interviewing, and so a lot of this is going to be about that. The interview process, this is really about the brute force way to find a job, and we'll get a little bit more into that, but that's the context for this. So first of all, ReactiveOps, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our company so you have some context. We are a fully distributed DevOps as a service company. All we do is build and maintain Kubernetes-based infrastructure. We have two of our folks here today, Kim and Andy, sitting over in the peanut gallery, who are here not because they want to learn, but because they want to mock me, which tells you something about our company culture, positive or negative. But yeah, so first, I want to ask who's here. Who's looking for a first job? Okay, so I figured that would be a large percentage of the audience, people transitioning in, and that's going to be a lot of what this is focused on. Second job, people looking for second job soon. Okay, that's good. Who are old career focal who've been in this tech industry for forever? Dan, raise your hand. Okay, I want to start with a disclaimer. This is my experience. I am a privileged white male. I happen to be bearded and often wear flannel. And, I basically won the career lottery, and anytime you hear somebody who won a lottery tell you, and you can too, you should take that with a grain of salt. So I say that to say, you probably need to disregard everything I'm about to say. With that disclaimer, well done, sir. With that disclaimer, we'll dive in. So I'm going to give a little bit of background about how I got to where I am today, and then we'll get into some of the specifics of how I think you should. So first of all, I had a couple various jobs growing up, right? I lived overseas until right before 11th grade, so I moved back to the States, and I didn't get a driver's license until a month before I was 17. So my first job, when I had a car and went and got a job, I wanted to work, I can't even remember where I wanted to work. I had one place in mind, and I told my dad I was going to get a job, and I went, and I walked in that place, and I applied for a job, and I came home. And I sat on the couch, and my dad said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I applied for a job." And he goes, "That's not how this works. You get back out there, and you walk into every single place, whether they have a sign-up or not, and you apply to every single place." And I got a job at a Swenson's in Fort Collins in 11th grade, washing dishes. There's a lot of background there that you don't need to know. My best friend applied for a job at the same time at Boston Market across the street from Swenson's. He waited 4 months, and they eventually called him and hired him. I worked for 4 months before he got a job because I just pounded the pavement till somebody gave me one. But that sort of set a lot of the context for what came later. In college, I worked for a small, well, I should say, after Swenson's, I did telemarketing, I mowed lawns, I worked in a paper company. In a paper company for 12 days, I collated paper once. You want to talk about mind-numbing work, collating paper? In college, I worked for a small tech company that invented Twitter about 5 years too early. It's called Pure Matrix, up on 120th. They went out of business. They went from 180 people down to 60 people, down to 3, and then they hired me. I was employee number 4. They went out of business pretty shortly thereafter. After college, I moved overseas and completely left tech, and I was involved in a large, we're talking 25,000 person organization, nonprofit, doing leadership and strategy consulting with NGOs and churches. Needless to say, when we had 4 kids and it was time to move back to America and I wanted to get back into tech, everyone was like, "What the fuck were you doing over there?" Right? Nobody had any box to put me in. And so there was nothing in my history that was relevant experience to anyone. Everywhere I interviewed, people were like, "No, that doesn't make any sense. None of this connects." And so it didn't matter that I'd done sales. I'd recruited and led teams. I'd started branch offices. I had a lot of pretty relevant experience that nobody had a box for. And that was a significant part of how long it took me to get into tech coming back. When I moved back to the States, so I've been back in America about 4 years, and in the job search, which I'll get more into in a little bit, it took me 6 months and about 500 job applications to get a job. I was the first employee, well, the first hire at ReactiveOps. There was actually already one employee who came with the founder. We're now 22 people, 38 people, depending on how you count us, if you count our contractors or not. So we've grown a lot in the last couple of years. In that in-between, I also did some sales consulting for a manufacturing company in Houston. We're talking, I have no idea about anything manufacturing, sheet metal. Anybody in the oil industry heard of Schlumberger? Yes? Okay, I cold called Schlumberger and asked what Schlumberger needed, and it's spelled Schlumberger, but it's pronounced Schlumberger. So anyways, I've made every really terrible mistake in the book, but briefly in between, that was something I was doing. So, real quick, the best way to find a job, network. Find somebody who knows people and get your way in, right? Ask for advice, not a job. If you are out of a job, sit down with all of your friends and say, this is who I am, this is what I'm thinking, what do you think? Okay, because if you say, do you know anyone who wants to give me a job, they're all going to just glaze over and say no. And if you say, hey, this is what I'm thinking, this is where I think I'm going, everybody loves to give advice, and the moment they start giving advice, their gears start turning. And it's just a little tiny marketing tweak in what you're saying, but it makes all the difference in the world. So when you're looking for a job, ask for advice, don't ask for a job when you're networking. But that's not what today's about. If you have a good network and you can get yourself into a job, you probably don't need to be here. Or this is mostly going to be irrelevant, but this is largely going to be about a brute force approach into finding a new job. So real quick, talking about a sales approach, what makes a salesperson a salesperson? Anybody have thoughts on that? They sell something. Brilliant. Something else? Personality traits about them? They can be aggressive in their approach, okay? Relentless. Persistent, okay?
Usually passionate, like invoke that passion in somebody else.
They're passionate, invoke that passion with other people, yeah. They're okay with failure, that's a pretty good one. In the back? Good people skills. I mean, sometimes. There's a lot of salespeople who are really good at selling and don't have any people skills. But they might bend the truth. Now we're talking stereotypical slimy salesperson, which are a type of salespeople.
They also, if they hear a no, they move on.
If they hear a no, they move on. Okay, that's good. Well, go ahead. Last one. Solve your problem. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of these things. I mean, I think a lot of people think of salespeople as sly, cheat you with their words. They know fancy tactics to, kind of tweak something out of you. They have a ton of confidence, right? Like, I'm your guy, and here's why. I would argue that it's about pounding the pavement. It's the persistence that really makes a salesperson a salesperson. What sets a salesperson apart from everyone else is they wake up, they have no idea where else to look, and they go and pound the pavement anyways. I think that's really what sets a salesperson apart is they can be completely out of options, and they're going to go find new options anyway. And so that's what a lot of this is going to be about. So the next two pieces are split up into getting the interview and then what to do once you get the interview. Getting the interview. First of all, finding a job is a sales problem at the end of the day. That's why this is a sales approach to it. And all sales problems at the end of the day are just a numbers problem. If you apply to enough places, you will get a job, okay? Because, and I think this is why I got this job, I don't think the guy I applied to at this company, I don't think the CEO ever read my resume. And when he got on the phone, he did all the talking. I didn't have to sell anything. And he thought I was great and he hired me. And I'm pretty convinced it took 500 applications to just get to somebody who wasn't going to read my resume and call me anyways. And so there's some amount of, with interviews too, like interviews are a sketchy process, right? We turn down lots of wonderful people because it's really hard to tell from a 30-minute interview if this is the perfect person or not. Likewise, that works in your favor. Eventually someone's like, this person's great, no matter how bad you did. So it is, at the end of the day, just a numbers problem. I had a teacher in college. I have an English literature degree as an undergrad. And one of the worst teachers I had in college told a story about how he believes he owns the world record for the most number of rejections on a manuscript. 150 rejections before his book was published. His book is total shit. Like, you don't understand how bad this book is, but eventually somebody says yes, right? Maybe they didn't read the manuscript, I don't know, but at the end of the day, it's just a numbers problem. All sales problems are just numbers problems. So apply to everything. It literally took me 500 job applications. I have 490 something cover letters, except for the few companies that didn't ask for them. I was in the peak of job hunting, doing as many as 15 applications a day, just heads down applying to literally everything. I was trying to move to Denver. We were in Houston when we just got back from China, and so I was applying to everything. I remember at one point I was so heads down just applying to everything. I was halfway through a Hertz rental car application to like work a desk, and the website crashed, and I was like, what am I doing? I do not want to work for Hertz rental car, but like that's how driven I was in the search. Gosh, there was, well, I'll get to more of that in a little bit. Network with everyone. Again, even when I came back from China, I had a lot of friends in America, and all of them were like, I don't have a box to put you in. There's no way I can put my reputation on the line putting you forward for anything, right? Like, people just didn't understand what I was doing, so they didn't have a box to put me in. I cold called into a lot of companies. I actually got an interview at Slalom in Denver, cold calling in. That interview will come up in just a minute because it's one of the more embarrassing interviews of my life. But cold calling in and just, hey, can you tell me about the company and tell me about this? And this is a little bit about my experiences. Is some of that relevant to what y'all are doing? And there's a shocking number of places that would pick up the phone, and I got better at my pitch through doing it over and over and over again. I sent a lot of cold emails. In the end, the job that I landed, I got because Hacker News, if you're in tech, Hacker News has a who's hiring thread once a month. And a lot of the people who post on there are like, I'm the hiring manager, send me an email at this email address. And it's a really unique opportunity to write and say, hey, I saw your posting. That's like, we have something in common. And you're getting right in front of the hiring manager rather than going through a website. At our current company, I would guess that about half the people that work for us came through referrals. Our CTO applied on the website. Became an engineer, and now he's the CTO. So like, there are always people that just walk through the front door. It's a lot smaller percentage, but it's about pounding the pavement. Another real quick story of a good friend in Houston who works for Edward Jones. Everybody know Edward Jones, the financial planning place. When he started, they had I believe it was 300 doors per day policy that he needed to knock on, and just a huge percent nobody's there. A huge percent they slam the door in his face. But he said, you do this for 2 years, and once in a while somebody's like, I've got 60 grand in a bank account, I guess I'll give it to you. And it started to grow, right? It took him 3.5 years, and he went from like literally knocking on doors every day, all day long, to so wealthy he couldn't believe it. Because just eventually someone's like, yeah, I've got $40,000. My uncle has $1.5 million he's looking to do something with. Do you want to help him invest that? He's like, yes, I do. So it's about pounding the pavement. That's just to get an interview. Apply everywhere, eventually someone will call you. Now there's a few things, like there's a lot of advice related to resumes that helped. In fact, one of the things that I did was I called a recruiting agency twice a week because it's their job to make you feel like you are the cat's meow. And these people get on the phone with me and they're like, this is incredible. I have no place to refer you, but you're gonna have the best time getting a job, and here's why. And then every one of them gave me advice on my resume, and most of the time it made no difference. Eventually there was somebody who gave me just a few key points, like spoon feed the job titles that you want. I tell everyone, put 3 titles at the top of your resume. You want to be a front-end engineer, full-stack engineer, engineer grandioso, whatever you want those titles to be, throw 3 right at the top. I look at a lot of resumes. If I open a resume and there's not a title at the top, I look down and I see what titles this person has, and I'm like, or has had, and I'm like, well, I guess they probably want something like that, and we're not hiring for those. I'm not calling this person. Like I look at so many resumes, you have like 4 seconds in front of my eyes, and I will disqualify you. And it's going to be that way everywhere you apply. Spoon feed your recruiter. Spoon feed the companies that you're applying to. Write those titles in, exactly what you're applying to every single time at the top of your resume. Okay, once you get the interview, fail at the interviews. It's okay to fail. It's good to fail. In fact, interviewing is this really weird skill that you need kind of off and on. And the moment you're good enough at it that you don't, you get a job, you don't need it anymore, right? And then you go 2-3 years, you get rusty at it, and you get back out there. So a big part of getting a gig is interviewing a ton. Interview for jobs you don't want, because you do really well interviewing for jobs you don't want. And you come away from that like, oh, this is what I sound like when I'm confident in myself, right? Because you don't give a shit if you get the job. Interviewing is a skill. Mock interview with a friend if you can. So back to the slalom call. Cold call into slalom. I'd been interested in slalom as a company for a long time. I get a sales guy on the phone, I ask him a whole bunch of questions about their process, tell him a little bit about my background. He's like, dude, you would be a great fit here, you should apply for a job. And I'm like, yes, doing this right. So he sets me up with a recruiter. Recruiter calls me and says, hey, so tell me a little bit about your background. And I go into the hard sale. This is who I am, this is why I'm going to be a great fit for your company, on and on and on and on. And I stop and she pauses for a minute and she says, Kendall, what is it you think we do here? And I was like, nailed that one. So, I mean, like one of the more embarrassing, I did not get a call back. I talked a million miles an hour. On a sales tactic that they teach you in sales, let the customer do 90% of the talking. You ask questions. When people talk a bunch, they feel really good about who they're talking to. Something marriage joke in here that I won't make. I've got a couple other examples. There's a lot of interviews that I did that I was getting better and better at it, right? At one point I had 4 interviews lined up in Denver, so I bought a plane ticket and came out. I didn't tell anybody I wasn't in Denver because I didn't want anybody to have to worry about relocation fees. And I flew out and I had 4 interviews lined up in 2 days. I can't remember what the first one was. The first one was on like a Monday night, and then Tuesday morning was the next 3 interviews, right? And the first thing was, there's a Chinese tourism company in Denver who, they want a white guy who's from this area who can speak Chinese. Like, what better than inbound tourism? It's actually, Chinese people coming to Colorado, and they're like, you're going to run the whole office. This is going to be amazing. You're going to love everything about it. And I went to a breakfast and asked the guy, what are you paying for this, right? Because I'd already been through a couple rounds of interviews. They really liked me for it. They're all gung-ho about it. He's like, well, we can't probably pay you a whole lot. And I was like, can you give me some numbers? And he's like, well, we can't probably do 60. We might be able to do 40 grand. And I'm like, benefits? And he said, no. And I'm like, dude, I have 4 kids. Like, I would do this for less than other jobs because this is interesting. But if I can't eat, I can't take the job. And so then he was disappointed. It's very loud, I'm sorry. Can you still hear me in the back, or is it too loud? Okay, so, where was I? I'm sure it was really profound. Oh, so I can't feed my kids with that, right? So I tell the guy, well, I've got a couple other interviews lined up this afternoon. It's fine, we probably don't need to spend any more time talking because this probably isn't going to work. And he's like, oh, you have interviews lined up this afternoon? And I was like, yes. And he's like, oh. He's kind of disappointed, and I was like, what did you have in mind? And he said, well, I actually have 2 tickets to a Rockies game, 10 seats behind home plate. And I'm like, well, give them to me, and if I can't use them, I'll give them to a friend. And then I walk out of the coffee shop, and I call my 3 o'clock interview, and I'm like, hey, instead of meeting at your office, why don't we meet 10 seats behind home plate at the Rockies game, right? And the guy's like, fuck, yes, right? So I mean, talk about, and it was for a sales role to start, right? So this guy's like, hey, this guy can hustle. This is a great pitch. I'm kicking ass. He shows up at the Rockies game, and I'm wearing a suit and tie because I'm trying to look professional. He's wearing a t-shirt and jeans because he works in tech. We sit 10 seats behind home plate, and he just talks a million miles an hour. And I have to stop paying attention to the game. I'm staring at the floor because I'm trying to understand everything he's saying. And he just lives and breathes this world, right? And he's just, oh, contracts this, and these are the kinds of customers we sell to, and I'm trying to talk coherently. But I've already been up all night because I'm nervous about all my interviews, and then I had one fail this morning, and now I'm really hot and the sun's shining, and I really want to be watching the Rockies game, and it went really well. So he says, we're only about an hour in, he's like, I got to get back to work. Do you want to stay and finish the game and come interview tomorrow with the CEO, or do you want to go back right now? And I'm like, I need a fucking job. I'm going to leave the Rockies game. So I go out with him, hop in the car, we go up to their office, which is just a few blocks away, walk in, he introduces me to the CEO. CEO has a bench about this low in his office, and he has a tall bar stool. and he sits on the bar stool, asks me to sit down, he's looking way down on me, and his dog, about this big, jumps up in my lap and starts clawing at the only nice clothes that I own, because I don't wear a tie or even a button-down shirt in regular life. And I just like panicking, right? Like I don't even know what to do, and I'm trying to like hold his dog off of me. He becomes a little self-conscious, switches spots with me, and then I sit high up in this chair and just get my ass handed to me by the CEO. Like he was not a fan. I walked out and I was like, oh, everything was going so well. I should have waited till tomorrow. Should have watched the damn Rockies game. And anyways, they told me they'd get back to me. It was like a month and a half later. I called and I'm like, give me some good news. And the guy said, we hired 2 other people. And this was a company that had nap rooms and Whiskey Fridays. And I was like, I've seen the mountaintop. This is, it's never going to be better than this. I know the 2 guys that took the job that I interviewed for, and they were both out within like 6 months. So I'm like really thankful I didn't get that job. But failing is part of it. Right? And learning from that failing. And honestly, one of the hardest things is when you really, really want a job, it's really hard to interview well, because you come across as like super nervous and anxious. And it's something I'm super cognizant about as an interviewer, but not all companies are. I interviewed for a place where the person sat across from me, this woman literally, I mean, she didn't say these words, but everything about it was, I am better than you, and I'm here to destroy you. Are you sure you're good enough to work with me? And I was like, no. If you fail because the company is full of assholes, that's a good thing. Like, a big part of interviewing is you figuring out where you want to work, right? And there's a significant number of interviews that I took with companies I was convinced I didn't want to work at, that once I interviewed there, I was like, this is amazing, and I'm really interested. And a whole bunch of interviews at companies that I thought I was really interested in. And the first interview, I was like, no. So don't judge a book by its cover. It's really hard to tell from a company's website or the one person you know how good the company is. Also, read Glassdoor. I interviewed with one company who I was like super excited about. This is it. I found it. I get on Glassdoor and it's like, if you're 18 and are into weed and hooking up with your coworkers, this is the place for you. And I was like, oh. And I looked a little closer. They have the company name Babes calendar, where they have the women from their company in questionable poses for January through December. Yes, I'm very glad I didn't work there. But there is a company in Denver that does that. Finally, just on this point, in failing in interviews, some of the things I look for in interviews, like I said, I make snap judgments in resumes, right? I look at the resume and I immediately decide this person's good enough or not. Like I sometimes read down into the details. Often I've made a decision very, very quickly just based on the last few titles, a buzzword or two, and how they're pitching themselves at the top. It's the same in interviews. That camera comes on, we're a fully distributed company. I do a lot of interviews remotely. I do interview people occasionally in person, but that's not normal. But that camera comes on, and the person's wearing a white t-shirt that's kind of like, hanging down to the side, and there's Legos in the background, and the guy's slumped down like this, and he's like, hey man, how's it going? Like, I'm not hiring that guy, right? Like, I've already decided. And then I'm looking for a reason to not hire him and like disqualify him, right? And part of that is we're a services company, and we need to present well to customers. But that's like a shocking number of people show up late to interviews, stand people up in interviews, dress like shit in interviews, say shit in interviews. Don't cuss in interviews if you can help it. Like, I cuss a lot, and I don't really mind if people do it, but there's a lot of people who really do, and it's just not that hard to avoid. Don't have your dog walking around in the background. Don't bring your dog to an interview. Always ask for feedback. A few companies, a company I interviewed at told me we have a company policy not to give feedback. And I have another friend who interviewed for the same job, and he's like, dude, they gave me the best feedback. I'm like, fuck. I don't give feedback to people that I think are going to blow up at me. Does that make sense? If you come across as super professional throughout the whole process, and you ask for feedback, I'm going to give you detailed feedback. If you are like, why the fuck didn't you give me this job? Can you give me some feedback? I'm like, no, I don't give feedback. I didn't do that when they turned me down. Also, I interviewed somebody for a junior role once who I really liked them for it. They seemed like a good fit. I was like, hey, we're going to get you into DevOps. We're going to grow you in this. This is going to be, I'm really excited about this. And she sounded super excited. And then 3 days later sent me an email and said, the more I thought about it, I'm really not that interested in DevOps. 3 months later, I ran into her at a meetup here in Denver. She's like, so tell me what you do, and I'm like, I've interviewed you, do you not remember? And then she's kind of putting it together, and then she's like, oh, DevOps, that's pretty interesting. How does a person get into that field? And I'm like, you take the fucking job. Like, you've got to be kidding me, right? Like, don't turn a job down just because, like, always interview far into the process, go all the way to an offer even if you're not interested, because you get better at the process. You might find out along the way, hey, this is something I'm really interested in. These are pretty great people. Be visibly driven. Our marketing guy, his name's David, he's local in the Denver community. I met him at a Built-in Brews event. He was walking around with a stack of resumes and handing them to people like, hey, I'm trying to move here from Atlanta, this is what I'm interested in. If you know anybody that's hiring, here's my resume. And he hands me his resume, and I was just kind of like, this dude's walking around in this room hustling, right? And I threw it in my back pocket. We ended up hiring him for something that was pretty unrelated to marketing, like just like a one-time, one-off contracting thing. And I called him and I was like, hey, this isn't really what you do. Do you want to try this one-time contracting thing? I'll pay you this much an hour. And he said, look, this isn't something I've done, but I want to show you that I will do anything to have this job, and I will work my ass off on it. And he went and did it, and he did it better than I could have. It wasn't like a professional job, but it was clear to me this guy was a driven machine, and we hired him. Contrary to that, my best friend in Fort Collins, his name's Jeff, lived abroad in Germany in high school and junior high, loves Germany, thinks it's about the best place on earth. He's been miserable since he got out of college because he's had to like work in the family business because he can't get himself into a gig. I know a guy who works at Adidas in Germany, and I'm like, Jeff, I'll introduce you to this company. And I write an intro letter, I ask the guy at Adidas if he's interested, and Jeff never followed up. And I'm like, Jeff, I can never introduce you somewhere ever again. Like, what the fuck? If somebody introduces you somewhere, go do it. There's a shocking number of companies that I introduce to people who take forever to follow up with them, and one of those companies will have to remain unsaid right now. If you don't follow up, I stop introducing. Finally, in an interview, sell value. It's not about your, like, if you go really in depth to your past experience, this is what I've done, this is why I'm an exact fit, you're almost never going to get the job. Every company is different. Every role is different. And saying, this is the time I solved that exact same problem. Great, if you have those stories, great, tell those stories. But most of your answers need to be, here's why I'm not exactly what you're looking for, but I'm going to solve your problems anyway. And this is how I'm going to solve your problem. Hey, I'm not this, but I can hire for that, and I'm good at hiring for that. Hey, I'm not this, but I'm good at finding people in the company who are that, and I can lean on them heavily. Those kinds of things go a long ways in an interview. Just be honest and upfront with, this is what I'm not, and this is how I'm going to solve that problem anyway. Because if you answer every question with, I'm your person, I'm your person, I'm your person, and here's why, people start to get kind of like, really? You've done all of this? This is something that men do better than women in general. Like, it's like a well-documented thing that in job descriptions, men read through and they see like 2 bullet points that they can do, and they don't even read any further, right? Like, I got this job, apply. And women read the whole, like, the must-haves, and then they get to the nice-to-haves, and they see 1 point on there they're not qualified for, and they don't apply. And so, if you're an employer, that affects you. Think about how you're writing job descriptions. But if you're a woman, try to be a little bit like a guy and just be like, fuck it, I'm gonna apply. Like, I write a lot of job descriptions. We're pretty bad at writing job descriptions. Like, a lot of people are. Most companies, the manager's like, well, I guess I need somebody who does UX, can design good, right? Like, I mean, they have no idea what they're writing. So don't let those job descriptions scare you away, because oftentimes they're not very well thought out. Let's see. Finally, work at places that value diversity. Whether you're a white dude or not, it's a significant indicator for the empathy those people show and are willing to show, and you're going to be a better employee working with different kinds of people than everyone who looks exactly like you. I say that with Andy sitting right there, who looks exactly like me. It's a strong signal for places that don't suck. I wasn't interviewing, but I was picking the brain of a guy who runs a very successful couple 100-person organization here in Denver. He started it here in Denver, grew it really big. I'm being careful not to say who it was. And he said, I was just asking questions. Tell me about scaling and growth and the problems you had. And he said just something in passing. He said, when we hit about 20 people, we hired a woman. And now there's a vagina in the office. And I'm like, oh, so that's all she was to you, right? Like, I mean, like, that's when you don't want to work for a place that reduces women to their vagina. Don't go work at places like that. Finally, don't be afraid to talk comp early on. I try to set expectations when I interview people in the very first interview. This is what we're paying for this role. Is that going to be appropriate for you or not? And not a lot of companies don't do that. In fact, probably most don't do that. But it's not bad to ask about that. Hey, I just want to make sure we're in the same ballpark. What are you shooting for? Even if you give me a range. I don't want to waste your time. You don't want to waste mine. Don't fly to Denver to work for a Chinese company that's going to pay you $40,000 with no benefits. Negotiating it makes you look professional. Even if you just say, hey, can I have $5,000 more? Hey, can it be 15 grand more? Hey, what about this or that? I make a lot of people offers. I'm never offended if somebody asks for more. It makes you look professional. So always ask for more. They can say no. I say no sometimes. Yeah, so finally, in summary, it's really all about pounding the pavement. To get a job, pound the pavement, right? To get the interview, pound the pavement. Once you're in interviews, pound the pavement in interviews. That's really all there is to it. It's a numbers game at the end of the day. If you do it enough, something will go so wrong they'll hire you, or something will go so right they'll hire you. But one way or another, you'll get a job. Questions? Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, when do you ask for feedback? Yeah, wait until they say no. I mean, we have one employee who was kind of a narrow yes, and I gave him feedback after he started. Hey, just so you know, this was the only reason you were going to be disqualified, and you know, it was after he'd worked here for a little while, and I knew he was working out. But I said, hey, for future reference, when you interview places, this is something that people think about you, and if you come across a little bit different in this, you might have an easier time getting a job. But it's pretty unusual that you're going to get feedback if you say yes. So wait till they say no. And not everybody will give you feedback. Other questions? Yeah?
You said ask like early. Would you wait till interview 2 or you would ask right away?
So the question is, ask comp early. Do you ask in interview 1 or wait till interview 2? When in the process? So a little bit you play it by ear. I mean, there's some companies, like if you're going to interview at Netflix, they pay so absurdly, don't ask about comp, it's going to be more than you want. If you're interviewing at, you know, like a little tiny design shop or something, like there's a lot of questions you need to ask. I mean, when I worked for a 25,000 person organization, I never wondered where the money came from, right? When I interviewed for this job, ReactiveOps didn't have a website. And it didn't even occur to me to ask, are you sure you have the money to pay me? Right? And I should have. There's an awful lot of people who end up, particularly in early stage startups, working for people who can't actually pay them. So it's good to ask about the finances of particularly small ones. It's good to ask. I'd say, you know, it's fine in the first interview. What are y'all looking to pay for this? It's not. Some people might be uncomfortable with that, but I don't think so. Any hiring manager worth their salt's not going to be bothered with that. Same with recruiters. You know, hey, can you tell me what you're targeting for this? I just want to make sure I'm not wasting your time and you're not wasting mine. I think that's a completely fine thing to ask. And worst that could happen is they say, well, we want to talk comp later on. Okay. I want to see where you fit first. But I mean, often I give a range. Hey, this is what we pay our juniors, this is what we pay our seniors. Is something in between there going to work for you? And that's kind of how we move forward. Yes?
What's your most challenging interview question and what's the best answer?
The most challenging interview question. Honestly, like, I do a lot of pre-screens, so it's my job to sell the company more than it is to weed the people out. Again, most of the people I'm weeding out in that initial bit are like, tell me if you've ever done this. And they're like, nope. Okay, well, it was good talking to you, you know? Or those kinds of things. I don't believe in being a hard ass in interviews. An interview is somewhat going to give you insight into who these people are and what it's like to work with them. And I've been on the other side of a table with someone where I wanted to say, you know, like I said earlier, I'm under the impression that if I come work here, you're going to seek to destroy me. Is that what it's like to work with you? Because I don't really want to work with you if that's the case, right? Like, so I don't think it's about like what's a hard question and a hard answer. A lot of it is like, just don't lie. You know, don't weasel around things. There's a lot of people who are like Googling in the background because they don't know the question and they're trying to look it up real quick, and that doesn't look very good. But I don't have a hard question or hard answer.
So you mentioned that when you were applying to a bunch of different places, you also mentioned most needed a cover letter.
Most what?
Most needed a cover letter. So
Yes.
how many of those, did you write all of those, like, were they all custom, or did you eventually have a template that you did?
I mean, so when I started at ReactiveOps, I did sales. And just so you know, from a sales perspective, I cold emailed a whole bunch of companies to like, hey, this is who we are, this is what we do you want to buy what we're selling? And I could have 500 emails from a like lead providing source and type a template that's almost exactly the same as what I would customize, and I would have a 0% response rate. I could write 20 emails a day where I wrote them by hand, even though they basically said the same thing, and I would have a 30% response rate. I mean, it's a really big difference if you handwrite them, and in those, it's about shortness and then quality, not quantity. I will not read a second paragraph of a front cover letter, like just period. I won't read it. If we're like about to hire you, I might go back and be like, oh, I wonder what they said, but even that, I've probably forgotten at that point. And the vast majority of cover letters need to say, hey, look, this is why I'm exactly what you're looking for, or I'm not exactly what you're looking for, here's why I'm a good fit anyways, and this is really exciting to me. Full stop. That's the whole thing. It doesn't need to be any more than that. Other questions? I mean, so the thing is like a huge percentage of the companies that are posting for dev instead of junior dev want a junior dev. A huge percentage of the like that. If you limit yourself to exactly the title you're looking for, you're assuming that the hiring managers are more competent than they really are. Like it's not like a bash. It's just like we're busy, right? And we're not necessarily good at this. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think how to answer that. The answer's not, and I have a good friend. So I have a good friend who's a Chinese American woman, and she has told me there's a significant emotional cost for her to make even one job application, right? And so she has to be super careful about it. Like maybe she can apply 2 places a week. She's been out of a job for a year and 2 months, and I keep being like, you just gotta apply to more places, but like, you know, I also don't want to be like, hey, I'm the white guy with this experience who won the lottery, and you should do what I did. You'll win the lottery too, right? Like, so there's some amount there of give and take on that, but apply broader than you'd think would be my short answer to that. Yes? If
you had to pick, since this is a numbers game, when you're having the payment, would you call for places, or would you go and knock on the door and hand them a resume?
So the question is, if it's a numbers game, would you cold call more places or knock on their door and hand them a resume? So tech jobs, very few places are going to even have a phone number. Like a lot of them just don't. If you can walk into an office and say, hey, are y'all hiring? What are you hiring for? And just give, like, honestly, that's a pre-screen right there. Like, hey, this guy walked in and he wasn't an asshole. I think you should give him a call. Like, there's a huge percentage of people who apply online and you don't know if they're an asshole or not. I mean, a shocking number of people disqualify themselves in the first 5 minutes of answering a phone or coming to an interview because they're just shockingly incompetent with people. And so getting in front of them any way you can. Cold calling is like people don't answer their phones anymore. It's a pretty much ineffective means. It doesn't mean don't do it at all. You can still do it. I mean, I worked as a telemarketer. I cold called people selling the Contra Costa Times somewhere in California, and everybody who answered was like, what the hell's the Contra Costa Times? And I'm like, it's your local newspaper. And they're like, well, I've never heard of it. And, you know, it wasn't effective then.
Would you recommend, if you apply online, is it also okay to show up and be like, hey, I just wanted to make sure this came across on the hiring manager's desk?
Yeah, if you apply online, is it also okay to show up? Yeah. I mean, it shows initiative to me, right? Like, so our most recent sales hire, I went to a built-in brews event, met a whole bunch of people. None of y'all are looking to get into sales positions, I would guess. Shocking number of people at events for sales hiring are like standing in the corner like this, and it's like, yeah, you're not getting a sales job, right? But this guy, I had a good conversation with him there, but I had 100 good conversations. I had 5 people I knew I really wanted to follow up with, and I'd forgotten about him. And he sent me an email, and he's like, hey, just checking if you'd seen this resume, if you'd had a chance to follow up with it, and I ignored the first email. Like I didn't remember who he was, and I was like, oh, that doesn't mean anything to me. And the second email came in. No, actually, he cold called me after that, and he just said, hey, he left a voicemail. Hey, Kendall, this is Anthony. We met at this event. I'm still interested in this position. Let me know. And I gave him a call back, and we hired him. And particularly in sales jobs, you want that. But I really think so as a hiring manager, one of the scariest things, it's pretty easy to vet who can do the job, right? The hardest thing to vet is who will do the job. Because a shocking number of people show up with the skills and an inability to work hard. And so anything you can do in the interview process or job hunting to show that you're a driven machine is going to pay dividends for you. It's not, people aren't going to be, I mean, you can reach a point of harassment. 2 is not going to be that. Yes? Yeah.
I would like that, so but I'm also desperate, which is cute. So how do you kind of do that when you're in that mode?
I mean, after 500 job applications in 6 months, I was pretty desperate too. I mean, part of it is to not look desperate. Try to hide the desperation. That's terrible, but true, right? You reach a point where you just need a job. And you can change in 6 months when you find something better. You can keep pounding the pavement once you get that job, but you just need something to pay the bills. And I still don't go work for assholes. It's not worth it. But, so Kim, who works with us, has a side project where she's building a glass door for diversity. And so you can go read reviews of companies that are hiring diversity. And there are resources for those kinds of things. Going to Women Who Code events, going to any event, and when a competent person approaches you and talks to you, they're not afraid of the fact that you're a woman, that's sometimes a sign. But, I don't know if that's helpful. Okay. 1 or 2 more? Yeah, go ahead.
If somebody asks you where you can,
always be as vague as possible. There's lots of interest. You wouldn't believe how many people I'm talking to right now. I cold emailed 7 of them. Don't say that last one. Just always leave it vague. Create a false sense of demand. Hey, I need to make a decision by this time, or I can't move forward. Oh gosh, how did this all work out? When I took this gig, I had interviewed for a solar energy company in Golden that I was really interested in working for, and they were being bought by a Chinese company, and they needed a white guy who could go and interact with their new overlords. I continued interviewing because it looked like it was in the bag, but they hadn't made me an offer yet, and they said, hey, we're not going to have the money until this deal closes. It won't close till the end of the month. Well, the 30th of that month, when I called them and said, hey, can you make an offer? And they said, the Chinese company went bankrupt, and we're probably never going to be able to hire you. The next thing I did was pick up the phone and call this company and say, hey, I've had a couple other things come up. Do you want to make me an offer? And it wasn't do you want to make me an offer within the next 3 weeks? It was do you want to make me one or not? And they made me an offer. And I didn't have, I spent 6 months and I didn't have 5 offers, I had 2, and 3 of them I couldn't live with. Yeah, my math is really good. Dan, you had a question. Do you still want to ask?
I guess I want to the difference, the relative priority of luck versus hard work in this approach.
So the question is the relative priority of luck versus hard work. So again, the hard work shows itself, and I think that lends to people hiring you. At some point, you just need luck. If you play the lottery enough, you will win. The difference is it's a little easier to interview for enough jobs. Think about the people that are really pretty big shitheads. A lot of them are employed. these people managed to find somewhere that would interview them, and it's not they're necessarily better at it than you. It might just be they knocked on the right door at the right time, and that's what sales is. Eventually, it's the right door at the right time. Yep. Last one, and then I will be all done for all y'all's sake. Go ahead.
So hard work usually like takes the time to get to know someone. You see them in action, and that's how you can tell the type of worker they are. How can you, what would the best approach be to create like your work ethic, your drive, and interviews?
You can say in a cover letter that you're a driven machine. I mean, it helps. Like honestly, like this is why I